Wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming. I think this is a really wonderful initiative. You get to see, so my background is very diverse. I started off in educational psychology and cognition, and now I've combined sort of a health psychology approach. So you can see the whole spectrum of research as it applies to teaching and learning. So this is really a wonderful opportunity and platform to share that. So my talk is going to share with you how an understanding of our cognition, so how we actually process information, can impact how we should design instruction and how it impacts learning, but also what is the state of your physical body and how can that inform how your brain is working. And obviously your brain and body are very much interconnected, and we need to leverage that knowledge, because if we can combine those two in terms of how we design instruction, potentially we can offer the most beneficial learning opportunity to students. So I was asked to develop a series of learning objectives, voluntold too, which is great. I feel like it does provide structure for what you should be taking away from this talk. And I also want to say that if you have any comments, questions throughout, this is supposed to be more informal. I don't want to be, it's not timed for 25 minutes I talk and then you're allowed to ask questions. Just whatever comes into your head, feel free to say it. So the first thing that I'm hoping to accomplish is to help you identify how cognitive limitations can impact the way we should be designing instruction. The second thing is, how should we apply these scientifically sound principles to the design of your own instruction or presentation. So I'm hoping that in my delivery of certain principles and how instruction is designed based on science, you see for your own presentations and instruction how you can apply these ideas. And last but not least, I want to then sort of change gears a little bit and look at how the body state impacts the mind state. So the biggest crux that I found in the tenure of my academic career in terms of the most predictive factor for academic success is this construct called working memory, and it is the bottleneck of the learning process. And what that means is, as you can see, sensory information is vast and infinite. So all of the information that you have coming at you from your environment, such as sound, sight, touch, all of that is coming at you, but it gets streamlined into what's called this working memory construct, which is finite. And what that means is you can't be bombarded with an endless stream of information and expect to learn it efficiently. There are some limitations. And this working memory construct is the part of your brain that helps you process and integrate information that comes from long-term memory, so that you can essentially develop an understanding of new incoming information. It allows you to create some new representation of content. Okay, and as you can see, the long-term memory part of this diagram too is also infinite. So it's really this working memory part that we need to be very cognizant of when we're designing instruction. So for me, I really wanted to know, is too much text bad? This is where the beginning of sort of my research started, all the way back into the 4th year of my undergrad, where I needed a thesis project. And this is such a common way for instruction to be delivered, whether it's an instructor in an actual course or conference presentations are often just overwhelmed with these kinds of presentation styles. And I really wanted to know, is this actually detracting from the audience's ability to understand content? Because is it overwhelming this working memory capacity system? And so I designed a study that tried to juxtapose different presentation styles. So this was a short 9-minute presentation that we created, where if you were a participant in our studies, you would come into the lab and you would sit in front of your own computer, and for 9 minutes you would watch one of these 3 styles. Now all of the actual overlapping audio track is the same, but you could either be watching a presentation that just contained redundant text, or images that complemented the narration. Or potentially you were just sitting and listening, and it was essentially like a podcast. And then after those 9 minutes, we gave you a comprehension test. And that actually allowed us to see objectively the information that you extracted from these different presentation styles. And what we found when we looked at performance on that test was a very clear advantage for the complementary presentation style. So clearly images were really helping foster learning above and beyond all of this text and just auditory input. Now, clearly this is like the bar that people gravitate towards, but what's fascinating is you're providing twice as much information technically when you're presenting redundant text. You're providing visual information and auditory information. So there is unfortunately this assumption that the more information you give to students, the more they'll be able to absorb. When that working memory construct tells us that no, it will become overwhelmed at some point. Yes?
I have a question.
Sure.
So does this fit within the Accessibility Act in the sense that, you know, if some people are more visual and they like to read things as opposed to hearing and looking at pictures, like how does that fit into everything?
So that's a good question, and it brings up sort of an interesting topic in the sense of, I'm sure some of us have heard of learning styles. And so the idea that some of us are more verbal learners or auditory learners or text-based or image-based or kinesthetic. And that really has not received a whole lot of support. Actually, it's been debunked almost in the literature. So despite the fact that there are preferences for certain learning styles, so I might prefer more images or I might prefer more text-based content, everybody's cognitive system for the most part will process information in a similar way. So you won't be some sort of super robot in being able to process a lot of visual text as opposed to someone else who is benefiting from the images. So yes, there are preferences, but I think that the science is suggesting that there are fundamentally better ways for everyone to absorb information. But I do want to point out one stipulation for that. We do see some age-dependent effects where our older adults actually learn better from more text than images. So there are boundary conditions, and that's sort of evolving in the research when you have to keep your audience in mind in terms of what their cognitive limitations are. It's a great question, yeah.
Wasn't your question about us meeting the AODA?
Yeah. About accessibility. So what do you do with somebody who is hearing impaired or?
Oh, well, then that's just a limitation that would have to be considered in that moment. But yeah, you should, if that's a condition, then for sure, then text is going to be the best way to present that content, for sure.
Thanks.
No problem. Anything else related to this? Okay, so this was obviously really interesting to me for a number of reasons, because you were able to show that just by virtue of the way you're presenting information, you can change the way information is actually extracted and learned. And so to me, that was really fascinating. And what I also wanted to know, though, is can you then, maybe you can combine images and text. Maybe text is actually a good thing in certain cases. And it's not, depending on the content, potentially if you're teaching linguistics or physics or chemistry, there might be certain content that are more suitable to visual text. But for psychology-based material in this context, text at least was not the most beneficial. But should you combine both images and text, maybe that's the most optimal way to sort of get into both worlds. Or should you just remove that visual text? So what you saw here was some of my eye tracking research. And so what an eye tracker does is it literally does what it sounds like. It tracks your gaze for any part of a visual screen. So you're able to see what people are looking at. Are they looking a lot at images? Are they looking a lot at the text? And you can correlate that with actual learning. So what we see here is you can see that there's a lot of transitory eye movements, but without a comparison, it just looks like this is how people are looking at a screen. But what you can see, and objectively, if I gave you the numbers for this, there are a lot fewer transitory eye movements in a presentation style that just removes that extra visual text. And so that's just, okay, that's an observation, that's interesting. But in terms of actual learning of this content, as we get from comprehension performance, we're looking at an 11% difference if you just remove that extra visual text from your presentations. And sort of what eye tracking does is it allows you to say something about the underlying cognitive processes at play. And the idea is that there's a lot of reading of the text. It's almost functioning as a form of distraction because a person can't decide what to pay attention to. Should I read? Should I watch the images? Should I listen? There's just too much going on. So from that, we do still need to ask the question, what if we are instructors of non-psychology related courses? So if you're teaching content that is very rich in jargon, so if there's highly technical words, what do you do then? Is an image appropriate to support your instruction? I don't want you walking away thinking images, I must find an image to represent every single thing I want to talk about. So there are subtle things that you have to keep in mind. And there was some really wonderful work done by Catherine Overson over in New Hampshire University. And what she did was, so she is an expert on multimedia design, but she's not an expert in engineering, in biology, in chemistry, in psychology. And what she did was she worked with individual faculty members and ones that identified that they needed some help with their PowerPoint presentations in their lectures. And so she worked with them to help them apply some of their principles, some of the principles of multimedia design. And then she was able to monitor improvements in student performance across time. And one of the things that she found was that for courses where she just really didn't know the images that would best support the text that was being taught, all she did was, so this is my example of neural transduction, a fairly complex concept in neuroscience, but instead of using images, let's say, to represent that content, all she did was she had the instructor narrate or transition the sequence of bullet points one by one onto the screen. So why would that fundamentally change? So if I started with just showing this information on the screen to my students, what I'm saying is that's worse than if I sequentially present them one by one. Why would that be? Can anyone hazard a guess, depending on, think of working memory and attentional limitations? Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead?
I guess it's easier to focus when you present things one at a time.
It's easier to focus as you present one thing at a time. Yep.
Really know where to look.
You don't know where to look? Absolutely.
I'm assuming also it possibly builds one on the other, on the other, on the other, going down. And
Yep.
so if you start at the bottom, you've missed.
It's a hierarchy.
I automatically did. I was like, oh, which one should I read first? And if we're building foundations, you need to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't just assume that students are going to start at the first bullet point. We're sort of curious about sampling all of our visual environment, so we take in little bits at a time. Yep, back there.
You're as an instructor, like speaking about like the first point, one by one, then what I'm reading, or the audience reading, and what you're talking about won't conflict. They'll match up. But if I'm like looking at another point and you're saying something else, it'll conflict, and maybe that probably doesn't help you.
Oh my gosh, absolutely, because you might miss what the instructor is saying by reading, and maybe what they were saying was really important, and you missed that, or vice versa. You're missing what's on the screen by listening. Absolutely, yep.
It's also a contract between you and your students, which is that you're not going to overwhelm them with information. But when you put something like that on them, they don't know how long you're going to stay on that. If you show them one thing at a time, you're communicating to them that you actually are going to slow down, and they are going to get through it, and they don't
Right.
panic, and they can pay attention to one thing.
Absolutely.
If you just got that, you would go, oh, I have to read it all quickly.
And then scribble it down because it's
Right.
gonna, I need to have some transcript of information for when I need to study for my midterm. Absolutely, yep.
Some instructors will do the presentation in advance and print it off and write on it, that's good. And some won't prefer the big picture.
I'm so fascinated by that decision. Like, some people say, oh, I'm definitely not giving out my slides because then no one's gonna show up. I'm gonna give out like sort of missing pieces of the presentation, so you have to come for like the main points. So yeah, that's a constant thing that I find educators are battling with because they don't want you to be scribbling down, but they also want you to attend. So I don't know, maybe we can talk about how we all deal with that at the end. I think that's the perpetual struggle, honestly. I haven't seen anyone that's really found a good method. It's just all different methods. Yep.
Yeah, and how, I don't know, the impact of, let's say, if you post your lectures ahead of time, would you post the whole thing like this? How does it have any impact during class when you're presented one by one versus they still have the notes,
Right.
the whole thing there, right? So how is
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
because they want the notes, right?
Exactly. No, you're totally right. But what Dr. Overson showed, though, was such a subtle change in terms of transitioning points in one by one allows you, the theory behind it is that it really does allow you to create a controlled version of attention for your students. So you force them to attend to something specific in their environment, and that allows them to offload some of the resources from their working memory, just paying attention to that one short piece of information that you want them to focus on at that moment. So my question to all of you then, so I've presented, text is bad, but sometimes it's okay. How do we as educators, as conference presenters, at any time you're communicating information with technology such as PowerPoint, how do you actually decide when to use images and when to use text? This is a completely open question. I do not have an answer. I have ideas. Yep.
Text helps me remember what I wanted to say. So if I put a line of text on the screen, it's more like to jog my memory, hey, this is what you wanted to say on this slide, so that you remember to do it for your students.
And is that okay or is that bad?
Bad.
No, it's not necessarily bad. Again, it's okay, but it's like, how much do you provide, like the entire thought, like the entire 3 lines of thought, or is it just key phrases? And in that case,
Depends how comfortable I am with the material. If I'm
I see.
not very comfortable with the material, I'll put more, and if I am, then I feel like I can
and
hammer on.
that's wonderfully honest, because I feel like a lot of times text is used to support the instructor because they don't feel like they've really mastered the content, and that's reality, absolutely. Yep.
It's less text, more with more text, because otherwise you end up doing, remember this phrase that's a little bit vanilla? PowerPoint karaoke. I learned this one.
And you're just reading it, yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then really don't feel you're offering anything. So I think Catherine Overson came here a couple of years ago.
Yes, she did.
About right?
Yep.
She was amazing. And yeah, I totally redid everything I was doing after that session. Images that were not helping, but I thought were cute. And then it's okay, how does this image support what you're doing? And then just enough text. So it could be a question, it could be a key phrase. Because I'm the same as you. I need something to tell me what's coming up next. So but it's a phrase. It's not the whole thing.
Exactly.
And often it's a question or it's a something. So yeah, it's you've got to be really thoughtful about
You
it.
do.
We all have these habits of love to just throw stuff out.
Absolutely. Great point. Greg?
Got another honest answer. Sometimes it's cost.
Cost.
The availability of images as stock repositories, textbook that we have. Sometimes it's just more feasible when you have a timeline to use text. It's terrible.
I mean, no, but there are limitations to those things too, and that that puts you in a bind, but you can't avoid them. So, absolutely, yep.
I use the headings just to guide me. So the heading and the
Like a title.
Yep, and then there's some text, but I also teach a discipline that uses a lot of images, so I have to put the graph up. I
Right.
have to explain what happens when a particular thing changes.
Right.
So that's awesome, that's images, but I don't usually, like the points that I put up that are not the headings, those are things I need them to know. So
Absolutely.
I'm building their
Exactly.
repertoire.
Yeah. So you're in a field where naturally images will support your instruction. Great. Yep.
I find text useful when you're wrapping up information. So it's a bit like in students, reassuring to have to find out that I will have the
Yes.
the instructor is saying when I'm going
Mhm.
back home, so I can study from it. But images are definitely more useful throughout the explanation.
Yeah. This is the perfect point, and I was probably going to blow past it, so I'm so happy you brought it up. you can have summary slides after each sort of chapter of your lecture that can be all text, because that's the sort of key points that you want. It's like the learning objective slide. That was all text, but it was because that's what I wanted you to take away, and that's totally fine. But it's the presentation of the core content that you want them to learn that might be affected negatively by too much text. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And again, it's that sort of boundary condition where I don't want you to take this the extreme way. Even my learning objectives must be like weird, interactions between images. Absolutely not. So great point. Yeah. Did you?
I also find like I teach in computer science, so you have a lot of code which is text, but I find like it's a bit about the percentage of text that you present within a specific time. How much you spend on that text, because if you're kind of going so fast, people will want to read enough reading.
Absolutely.
Doing now. And also like the annotations, let's say like having circles around things that are a bit with another color or something. Well, that helps.
Yeah, and those are called, so if you Google, if you're interested in this topic in more detail, if you literally just Google multimedia design principles, there are about 12 that are listed, and one of them is called signaling, and it taps directly into that. So it's using things like boxes and highlighting and arrow to, again, humans are very simple in the sense that we orient towards things that draw our attention. So if you highlight some text or a certain part of the screen, you're naturally just going to be drawn to it. That's just how we've adapted. So you want to use those kinds of visual features to help in your instruction. Right, so this is all really wonderful, and I think we've pretty much tackled a lot of the first two of our objectives. So we've had an open dialogue about, what are the scientifically sound principles that we should use in terms of text and images, what are their boundary conditions, and I think that the biggest take-home point is not actually tied into research. It's tied into the fact that it requires thoughtfulness and time and dedication to the actual construction of your presentation. You really have to take the time to figure out what is the best way to represent this information. And without that, you can have all these principles and they might apply, but you might miss some things without that thoughtful process. So that's definitely the thing that underpins a lot of the effectiveness of these strategies. Yes? Slower pace. Yeah, absolutely. So I haven't specifically, and I'm not too familiar with the literature. I'm sure there is pace of instruction research, and just if we think about it sort of logically, those kinds of presentations with whiteboards or transparencies, overheads, they were probably a lot easier to follow. You were more immersed in the process of the instruction rather than, here are 5 things that I'm going to talk about in the next 3 minutes. You figure out what to pay attention to visually as I'm also speaking to you. So technology is wonderful, and it can really help create a more dynamic educational environment as long as we educate the users of those technologies to use them appropriately. Yeah.
So you had the 3 conditions at the beginning, but the condition you didn't have was where the commentary is not redundant. It's not 100% redundant.
Yes.
It's a solution.
Absolutely.
So that's often, I think, we're kind of more comfortable rather than just going to complete images. It's somewhere in the middle where you're adding that additional message to it.
Yes.
Do any studies that kind of compare images only to non-redundant to redundant?
Yes. So the image that you see with the dog and the liver or whatever, that's just one slide. I'd say the majority of the slides in that actually had key points interwoven amongst the images. So it wasn't just imagery. So actually that's probably something important that I need to make clear from the get-go when I talk about these presentations, is those image-based presentations also had key points. So it did have some text where it was appropriate. So, and though that's not bad for you, that's just as effective.
And the audio didn't have, so I'm just trying to make this, I do podcasts that are very plain PowerPoint slides with an audio, but the audio is not reading what's on the PowerPoint slide, it's from a meaning.
Right.
What's on that, so I'm just wondering where, that type of thing where you've got, because that's what we want to do in class, right, is to explain, but they're not necessarily paying attention to what I'm explaining, They have to use the fill in the blanks thing, and I hate that because they go, well, what was the blank?
Yeah.
And so you say the blank. It's, no.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure of the literature on that, but if it's a lot of text and you're talking about something that's sort of off on a tangent or unrelated, I know that's really bad.
Yeah, it's not related. It's okay. So this is the definition. Then okay, let's take the definition apart, right? And let's look at this. So it's that deeper level of thinking.
Right.
About what you're seeing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would venture on the side of at least whiting out or blacking out or something where that visual information is no longer present as you're moving on to a more deep content, because there will naturally be variation among your students, and some are just going to be staring at the text wondering, because in your mind you've moved on to a deeper concept. They might not know that. So it's still better just to remove any sort of distracting things. Yes?
Just made me think, that's the question that I've never tried. I'm not sure I can on PowerPoint, but to take away things.
Oh, you can.
A lot.
Yeah.
You start to take it away so they start to happen.
Yeah, they're called so there are entrance effects, and immediately to the right of them are called exit effects. Yep. YouTube, that's where I learned how to use all of the things related to PowerPoint. Oh my gosh, that's how I learned how to do stats. Thank you, howtostats.com. Shout out. Yeah, so these are all wonderful things that we definitely can keep in mind, but it's just part of the process. You just have to think about what you want to communicate and what's the best way to do so. So I'd like to, like I said, switch gears a little bit and look at some of the work that actually Michelle is a big part of this research that looks at how do exercise breaks, so taking a moment to do something physical with your body as you're learning instruction, can that actually make you better able to pay attention to that content, and does that translate into better memory of that content as well? So this is really a fascinating work that I'm very lucky to be part of, and it's really telling an interesting story. So first and foremost, attention declines with time on task. So hopefully I have captured all of your attention for the last half hour. But if you've started to notice your attention drift, that I won't take it personally. It's just how your brain works. It's totally fine. But it does. It declines as time on task increases. And what some of the research has started to show with children is that if there are exercise breaks that are introduced into children's classrooms, what happens is there is less fidgeting that they do in their seats. So these sort of more qualitative measures of attention. What teachers have noticed is that they sit in their seat much more comfortably. There's less fidgeting. And there is starting to be work that actually looks at their academic performance and whether these students are starting to learn better. And a lot of this work has also been done in the workplace. So a lot of times people are at their desk for 8 hours a day. And what a lot of the research has actually shown is that if you introduce exercise breaks like yoga on the lawn, or sometimes they organize walks in these research, work productivity actually improves. So time on task is reduced because they're replacing it with exercise, but the actual amount that they're able to produce in terms of work is greater. So it's actually to the benefit of the employer to consider incorporating this into, the daily activities of their employees, because in terms of a business, they're actually going to benefit. So we came up with the catchphrase. We definitely need to trademark this at some point because someone's going to steal it. So should you sweat so you don't forget was what we were thinking. And what we wanted to know was whether exercise breaks in a university class setting can actually boost attention and memory during learning of a lecture. So we had a 50-minute lecture, which is very dense, of introductory psychology content. Again, it was all computer-based. And we interspersed exercise breaks, 3 different ones, into this 50-minute lecture. So what did that look like in a little bit more detail? So in one condition, it was just control. So you watched this 50-minute lecture straight through. I feel so bad for you, but you did it. Good for you. The second condition, though, was a non-exercise break. So every 17 minutes or so into the lecture, you had 5 minutes where you could play Bejeweled, which is a computer game, right? Yes, those people, you know how awesome that game is, right? It's just so rewarding on so many levels. What we wanted to do with this break is we wanted to know, is it going to be, potentially if we see a benefit of exercise, is it actually the physical activity of your body that's producing a benefit? Or do you just need a break of some kind? And is playing a computer game enough to see any boost in attention and memory? And then our third condition was our crux condition, this exercise breaks condition, where participants stopped every 17 minutes and the experimenter led a series of high intensity exercises. So things like jumping jacks, high knees, these are called hamstring kickers. And so it was very intense, and they did that for the entire duration of the 50 minutes. But what we did though is, how do you measure attention among students? Well, there are a number of different ways, but what we actually settled on was before every break, well, in the conditions that had a break, before those breaks, we asked our participants to characterize their mental state at that time. Are you on task or off task? Essentially, it's a mind-wandering probe. Are you paying attention or not? And then they took their break. And so just to give you a full picture of what this procedure looked like, so the first part of the lecture started for 17 minutes. There was this baseline attention probe to see if they were paying attention at this point. Then they had their break, if they were in the game break or the exercise break. And we took a measure of their heart rate after. And that was just to control for the fact that we wanted to make sure that they were actually exercising and getting their heart rate up. And this sequence of events continued until the lecture was completely done. And after that, we gave them a comprehension test. We want to see how much information did you extract during this 50 minutes. We also sent them home, and we had them come back 2 days later to do a delayed test. And the reason for this is, in order to make any claims about educational relevance, you need to demonstrate that your effect is robust long term. Because a lot of research in education shows an effect immediately, but education is a prolonged process. We get tested after weeks of learning. So we wanted to show that any effect that we find, is it robust across time? So first of all, I'm going to show you just heart rate data, and I'm just trying to sort of lay the foundation that you believe me that those in the exercise groups were actually working out hard. So you can just see beats per minute on the y-axis, and the 5 different heart rate measures that we took across the study. And the 2 conditions that you see right now are the non-exercisers and the no breaks group. And you can see that they're hovering around 80 beats per minute. The exercisers started at the exact same point, so there's very little variance to start off with, but across the rest of the study, you can see their heart rate is much more elevated than the other 2 groups. And this was really a manipulation check for us, to be able to say to you, no, they were exercising. We can 100% say that they were working out hard. But the more exciting stuff is with respect to attention and memory. So attention, right, the proportion that rated that they were on task, that's what the y-axis represents, and the 2 experimental mind-wandering probes that we had that asked after the second and the third break that they took, or before those 2 breaks. And what you see, again, it's just the no breaks and the non-exercisers at this point. You see from about the middle of the lecture towards the end, attention just plummets. And that's normal. That's the natural state of how our attention declines with time on task. The exercisers, though, were able to sustain their attention for the entire duration of that 50 minutes. So it sort of got in the way of that natural decline in attention that we see. But how does that relate to actual memory of the content? And what we see is that if we take a look at the percentage correct on the comprehension test that we gave them, both immediately, so right after, and after that 48-hour delay, again, you see that those in the no breaks group and the non-exercisers were hovering pretty much around pretty poor performance, which was very common because the content is actually very difficult, so it wasn't that surprising. But they're just doing the same poorly throughout. Exercisers were able to have significantly greater memory of the content, and it was sustained. They didn't see a huge drop-off after this delay. So these exercise breaks not only helped immediately, but it made the content more robust across time. So our conclusions were that exercise breaks can increase on-task attention as well as improve memory. But that's just a drop in the bucket. We're talking about online lectures. We used high-intensity exercises, things that you don't want to be doing even when you want to work out. They're hard, and if I can't tell you to tell your students to get up and start doing jumping jacks. Also, like the environment, if you're in, you know, a stoked, what are you going to do? Like the hazards are too much. There's, you know, it's a wonderful study and I'm so proud of it, but there are so many other questions that we need to ask before we can get to the point where prescription and recommendations actually become a thing. And so some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves are what are feasible classroom exercises that can produce the same effect? And how many exercise breaks are needed? Do you need 3? Is 1 enough? If 1 is enough with the same effect, that's wonderful. That reduces time on task and makes everyone happy. What if exercise breaks are only effective for any environment where content is being presented for more than 30 minutes? What if it's completely ineffective for 3-hour night lectures where just everybody's just given up? You know, no amount of intervention will help at that point. And these are all important questions that we need to ask. And Michelle is actually spearheading the dose-response relationship in terms of are lower intensity, more yoga, stretching-like exercises just as effective as these higher intensity ones? Or is there sort of a Goldilocks middle, medium intensity effect possible? So I just think it's really important to keep all of these things in mind, but given the fact that we are seeing some benefit of physical activity in the educational environment, can we brainstorm any ways to incorporate physical activity into our actual classes that are more feasible? And I'm literally probing your brain so that I have future ideas for my own research. So this is just as effective for me as it is a group exercise in thinking. So I know, Dr. Goldreich, I know you have some sort of, can you explain what you do in your classes?
It's a neuroscience class, and I do what I call neuromuscular juncture, which is a riff on neuromuscular junction, which is
right.
nerve and muscle. And I have them get up, it's a night class, so at some point about halfway, they have this stretch, and it comes up with an icon on the screen of a person stretching. So first they just do a free-form stretch for 30 seconds or a minute, and then I show them the nervous system usually to bring in. I say something like, use these neurons in your stretch, or use these neurons. So you can point to, let's say, the hand representation of the left motor cortex, which controls the right hand.
Right.
And then you might point to like the hip representation, the somatosensory cortex, so they have to put their right hand on their right hip.
That's awesome.
Educational and a stretch.
Yeah, that's awesome. We actually recently, starting in January, we went into elementary school classrooms, into grades 3 to 8. We went into their math classes and introduced exercise breaks. They could just be purely aerobic, or they could be what are called cognitive aerobic exercises. So if they were told, you know, what is 3 times 2, they'd have to answer it in terms of number of jumping jacks and things that are more engaged but learning. And so what we're trying to understand is that the best thing that we can do for students, where their brain and body at the exact same time are engaged? So yeah, there's a whole lineup of research for that too. Greg?
What is it about the physical activity that actually produces these results? I mean, is it elevating the heart rate? Because if that's the case, could there maybe be some sort of dark bean-flavored fluid that's suspected to produce similar results?
I know. That's honestly, that's a wonderful question, something that we constantly are struggling with. What is the actual mechanism at play? So we have a theory that it might be hormonal, so things like norepinephrine and adrenaline that is released into your bloodstream is naturally tied to vigilance and attention, right? So when you're hunting and gathering, we got to go all the way back to evolution. Naturally, you were engaged in physical activity, and all of those hormones that were released led to this increased vigilance, and maybe that's what that is. Or it could just be arousal and heart rate. So we were actually thinking, can we show participants a scary movie? Can we plunge their hand into an ice bath that is also physiologically arousing? All of these questions are definitely on the table. We'll slowly start unpacking them, but
Good luck with the ethics.
Yeah, good luck. Well, that's a huge reason why we're like, I don't know if this will get through. So, yeah. I'm gonna go back there and then you. Yes.
If you go back to your slide where you showed that the non-exercise tasks seem to have the crossover, which was a bit surprising.
Mm.
And I just wondered whether those folks playing that wonderful game just kept playing the game, or.
Oh.
And my real question is about the permission to not, or the banning of multitasking during lectures. Is that part of it that we should really be saying, to turn off your phones?
Oh, absolutely. Multitasking in lectures is for sure something that should not be part of it. One of the things about the game that we found is that maybe we weren't actually giving them a break. Maybe we were just requiring them to devote resources to something else that was also cognitively demanding. So that might be why it's actually even worse.
It seems like they did worse.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. Yes.
I was just thinking about the exercise benefit. I was thinking maybe it's from way back being hunted, so you're having to process information really quickly and
Mm-hmm.
make your way in a state
Absolutely.
or whatever.
It's life or death.
Things in life and death, so maybe it's more so like that, where you can't think in a more laid back manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a
Things in quickly and process quickly.
That's a great point, and we actually have some wonderful technology in our lab with what are called functional near-infrared spectroscopy caps, and they're like an EEG cap. So they're little optodes that measure blood flow in your brain, and so we know the prefrontal cortex is really involved in these higher order executive tasks like attention and vigilance and working memory. And so we actually had some of the kids and people who are part of our exercise program wear these caps while they exercise to see, is blood flow sort of rushed to this area of your brain? And then when they do a cognitive task, is blood flow a lot more prevalent in that region? And that's what's facilitating this benefit. So lots of cool stuff coming out. Yeah, I'm going to go there.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about the residual attention and transitions between one activity for another? I've heard a lot of people suggest doing the Pomodoro technique where you work for a certain amount of time and then maybe have a break. But I've always found that it takes time to settle my mind into a task that requires attention. And then if I take a break and go out of it, then you have to resettle yourself into the task. So I'm just wondering if that sort of, how that sort of residual attention and multitasking fits into.
That's a great question. So we could technically set up a situation where we look at learning of content immediately following a break and see if it actually suffers, because it might tap into the idea of maybe there requires some buffer period for you to get back on task. I don't want to make any sort of guesses because I don't know, but I would imagine there would be, especially for the exercisers. Like, their bodies are going through a physiological change, but it didn't seem to hurt them. In fact, that might be why it was good for them. But in terms of playing computer games, that might actually be why it's bad, because maybe they were like, oh, I should have got that green diamond. Or are there diamonds? I don't know, whatever. They're shapes. So yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think it's something that would bear fruit in some form of research. Absolutely. Yeah, Dan?
It's probably good to have your breaks at a thematic junction.
Yeah.
So one topic just ended, let's take a break before we jump in.
Yeah, great point.
Self-directed rather than imposed.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you can put it into a point of your lecture where they just finished learning one thing, and so it's okay if you're kind of, they're not going to lose concentration if it's something they have to return to.
Yeah, and that might be why the Pomodoro method is not good, because it's a timed thing. So as soon as the time is up, you might be mid-construction of a concept that you now have to abandon, and so it's not going to be formulated as a thought. So, but if you as an instructor can impose those junctions. Yes.
Just a fun point first. We can put bicycles at everyone's seats, so they have to.
Oh, that would be cool.
Make their computer work.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's brilliant.
But now my real question. Is there any work on people or research done on people who have to stay on task, like air traffic control? And can you learn to stay on task longer? Is that maybe something, in addition to imparting information,
Yeah.
maybe we should be also, if it's possible, extending the amount of time they can stay on task?
Interesting. Yeah, I've never looked at that, but I'd imagine people in air traffic control, military, any. You would hope. I mean, they're.
Again, isn't that a life and death kind of?
Yeah, exactly. So.
You're responsible for someone else's life.
Yeah, maybe it's just the context. So maybe you know you're responsible. So a student is like, whatever. Like, I mean, I need a GPA, but. Yeah, that's a great question. Mhm.
They don't stop and do exercise.
Interesting. So maybe it's a mindset thing. It'd be awesome. See, I really I'm just gonna get on a whole other soapbox if I get on this rant too much. But my stipulation with a lot of research, that is education research, is we're creating contrived situations where we have participants are supposed to mimic student learning who have zero motivation to learn this content. That's a fundamental component that's missing. So even the sort of guidelines that I can offer you from my research is missing that fundamental feature of student motivation. So even that, so it literally might be a mindset thing. I'm not sure, but that's what I'm thinking. That's a great point. Yeah.
Same thing like people who work on safety critical systems, the technology they're working with like should be or is adapted so much so that if there is like a safety critical situation, they are alerted. So there's something that peeps or
I see.
visual that comes up so that they pay attention, and now you have to like be in your highest attention.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's another factor. It's not up to them. Like at a lecture, sometimes like if you're not interested in the point where you're even tired or you didn't have a good sleep,
You can
they
check
just
out.
off it.
Yeah.
But they don't like even if they're not sleeping and they have that like
Right.
siren going on, they have to pay attention.
So there's checkpoints for those kinds of
Okay, it's not
positions.
up to them.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah.
I think that this has really been interesting stuff. I think it reinforces that we've got to untether students from the furniture and the same people at work. I think it was in the tin cup, one aircraft controller was walking around while she was, putting the planes down. So maybe that's the solution in the workplace is you're allowed to get up and you have devices and tablets and things, right? You can get up and walk around. But yeah, with the existing lecture halls where students have to sit, that's why I teach a couple of courses, third and fourth year, where I always ask for a room with tables, and part of it is you get up and move the tables
Absolutely.
together to have a group discussion. So now I wonder if just the furniture moving will have the same type of impact.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, mine are not going to go jumping jacks. They're going to go, I'm not paying for you.
Yeah. I know, it would not bode well.
But yeah, something that's linked to what we're doing. We're going to put it in groups because in groups in workplaces, they get round the table together. So let's make some tables moving there now. Yeah. So if you want to spend my people moving furniture, hey.
There you go. Well, that is all I had. So we tackled these learning objectives, I hope. And thank you so much for listening. And you were wonderfully engaging. It was awesome.